You are asking me what it is to be a Palestinian. Well, I think that in very simple terms, it's a question of lack of identity.
And unless, you see, this man finds a place, an anchor, he will always be the stateless, the refugee, the man without an identity and who is searching for this right, and it is a human right.
To be a Palestinian is to accept the status quo of wherever you happen to be without the real sense of belonging, because strictly speaking, you are operating wherever you are at the goodwill and discretion of the country that is accepting you.
Wherever he is, they tend somehow to look at him as a suspect because he does not have an identity in the sense that he does not have a country, a home. He is stateless.
They have come from Haifa and Jaffa, from Hebron and Jerusalem. First in 1948 as their land was occupied. They fled again in 67 and in 70, in 76 and in 78. Each time, new hostilities had forced them to seek new shelters. Some have been refugees for over 30 years. Some were born as refugees. But no matter where they came from or where they now live, these people think of themselves as Palestinians first, and most have but one dream, to return to their homes in Palestine. Since World War II, the Middle East has been the scene of continuous violence. In 1947, the United Nations endorsed the creation of one Arab and one Jewish state out of the British Mandate in Palestine, under a partition plan which provided also for the establishment of an international regime in and around Jerusalem. Israel was established in 1948, but the Palestinian Arab state never came into being. Since then, there have been 4 full-scale wars, all threats to world peace. Territorial limits kept moving back and forth, and between and around, during times referred to as no war, no peace. Thousands of people from all sides who fell victims to endless attacks and counterattacks.
We could very well, indeed, find a way to coexist in Palestine with an Israel. But you see, we must get guarantees that this Israel will not expand, because ever since the existence of Israel, it has expanded onward. And they have tried to erase our identity as Palestinians. For instance, I started out to be a Palestinian. Then in 1948, I was referred to as a refugee. Then I was referred to as a Jordanian, an Egyptian, a Lebanese, a Syrian. And on the way, I heard from Golda Meir that I do not exist. And now they call me a terrorist. Eventually, you see, these people have expanded and they have tried to erase my identity.
Palestine has always been the battleground of empires as well as the meeting place for the exchange of cultures. There have been waves of people that have come into it, mostly from Arabia, which is the cradle land of all the Semitic peoples. Now, these people have intermixed throughout history. They were Arabicized in the middle of the 7th century when the Arab-Muslim invasion of Palestine took place and inhabited Palestine for the long course of history.
Arab nationalists do not deny the Jewish presence of biblical times, but they point out that this was also the land of the Canaanites and the Philistines. Babylonians, Persians, and Greeks were there too at one period or another. The region was under Roman occupation at the time of Christ. The exodus of the Israelites took place soon thereafter. The fall of the Roman Empire cleared the way for Arab civilization to blossom. Then the Muslim Empire was succeeded by Ottoman rule. On the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, this rule was to last until World War I. The 19th century witnessed tremendous upheavals. Europe had its Industrial Revolution, but the Middle East, too, was seeking a new identity. After 500 years of Ottoman rule, the idea of sovereignty had begun to revive, and many Palestinians and other Arabs launched independence movements. Since the Crusades, 3 religions had coexisted fairly peacefully in Palestine, but by the 1890s, new colonies of Jewish immigrants started to appear. The pogroms the Jews had had to endure in Europe had fostered Zionism, a doctrine calling for regroupment of the Jews in a land to be called the Land of Israel. During World War I, the British, seeking assistance for their war effort in the Middle East, wooed both the Arabs and the Zionists. To win the latter's support, in 1917 they promulgated the Balfour Declaration. This declaration promised British support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, although it was careful to note that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. And the population of Palestine was over 90% Arab at that time. When the war ended, rather than becoming independent, most of the Middle East was placed under British and French administrations, under the League of Nations mandate system. The League's covenant provided that such territories were heading for eventual self-determination and independence. For the Palestinian Arabs, the struggle had become twofold. They wanted termination of the mandate and repeal of the Balfour Declaration, since the establishment of a Jewish homeland meant increased immigration by Jews and appropriation by them of lands the Palestinians had owned, inhabited, and cultivated for generations. The period between the 2 world wars witnessed a series of Palestinian demonstrations, protests, and rebellions.
If the international community had looked at the Palestine question with justice, they would have recognized that here was a majority of Palestinians and there was a minority of Jews, and that the majority of Palestinians had rights, if not equal, at least greater than the minority of the Jews, and that ultimately the best solution for this was one state in which both the Arabs and the Jews would live under one government.
But there was not to be such a state. In 1947, Britain placed the question of Palestine before the United Nations. On the 29th of November, a vote was taken to partition the area. There was to be one Jewish and one Arab state. For the Jews, most of them scarred for life from years of Nazi atrocities in Europe, this was cause for joyful celebration. But to the Arabs, any partition which granted 56% of the land to 32% of the population was unacceptable. Fighting and skirmishes continued. On May 14th, 1948, a Jewish state self-proclaimed itself under the name of Israel. Incidents such as that of the Jewish massacre of Arabs in the village of Deir Yassin, which had taken place in April, had spurred an exodus of refugees. Neighboring Arab states sent troops into Palestine, claiming they were acting for the sole purpose of restoring peace and security and establishing law and order in Palestine. It became full-scale war. Numerous UN efforts to negotiate a truce were fruitless. In September 1948, the United Nations chief mediator, Count Folke Bernadotte, was shot and killed in Jerusalem by a Jewish extremist group. Only in the spring of 1949 was an armistice reached. By that time, more Arab land had been taken. Israel had already begun to expand its borders.
The main effect on the population was to create a great deal of panic and fear. The population, for the most part, was unarmed. They were confronting a well-organized and well-armed invasion. As a result, when the events like the massacre of Deir Yassin in April of 1948 occurred, panic spread through the population, a population which was in 1947 and then continuing into the spring of 1948 was not well organized and had no political center to it. As a result, the principle and the main impulse of people was to run, to get as far away from the fighting, from the terror as possible.
By December 1948, half of the population of Palestine had fled. The following year, the United Nations established UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. The agency's mandate: to provide registered refugees, wherever they may live, with food rations and shelter, health care and basic education, enlisting the collaboration of host nations. It was to be, and still is, financed from voluntary contributions. When work got underway, an estimated 500,000 people were getting UNRWA's help. By 1978, the figure had increased to 1,760,000 Palestinians registered to receive care. In 1948, the Assembly had resolved that the refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date or be duly compensated. This has been reaffirmed by the United Nations every year ever since. But these resolutions failed to be implemented because repatriation in accordance with these resolutions was not permitted by Israel.
Most of our population is a poor population, and those who have to live in camps live in misery and squalor and poverty of a sort that really is intolerable. Nevertheless, since the late 60s, the lot of the camp dweller has been improved not only by the social, medical, and educational services provided in the camps, but also for the first time in their lives, they now have a sense that by struggling politically and militarily and even intellectually, they are beginning to move out of the camps. They are no longer simply forgotten people left to rot there indefinitely.
Beirut, Lebanon. In a still recent past, a prosperous metropolis. Since the mid-70s, a city devastated by an intractable civil war. For years, affluent people lived in comfort here. Not the Palestinians, though. There are an estimated 400,000 of them here in Lebanon. They are to be found crowded in areas which do not live up even to our usual concept of a refugee camp. In urban ghettos, which seem to get worse and worse as the years go by. This is where the Hubishi family lives. Refugees from 1948, they had resettled on the West Bank. The '67 war brought them first to Jordan. Then in '70, they were forced to move into South Lebanon. Now they are here in Beirut. Children were born along the way. The older boys pride themselves on being fighters already. The girls still go to one of the schools for Palestinian children that UNRWA has maintained and run since 1950.
The Palestinian people, like any other people in the world, had the right of having its own independent educational system that enables him to strengthen his national unity and to express his national Palestinian character. Yes, we like to emphasize the role of the masses in the Palestinian struggles through the last 30 years. And we like to emphasize the nature of our enemy And we like also to emphasize the difference between Judaism and Zionism as a political movement. We like to put in our pupils' mind the humanitarian nature of our struggle and the humanitarian nature of our social and political aspirations.
In the early 50s, the first resistance group appeared, El Fatah. In 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization was formed. 10 years later, at a summit meeting of Arab heads of state, the Rabat Conference of 1974, the PLO was recognized as sole representative of the Palestinian people. That same year, the General Assembly of the United Nations accorded it similar recognition.
The PLO is the sole representative of the Palestinian people. We have this organization which has different establishments in many fields, controlling all our different branches, executive committee, our military forces, our central council. We have our national conference, which represent all our organizations, political organizations, syndicates, unions, which represent our people inside our occupied territories and outside our occupied territories.
Be they invaders, tourists, or refugees, large bodies of foreigners are always resented by the local population, and the Palestinians have proved to be no exception. Many refugee camps have become grudgingly accepted enclaves, guarded by PLO soldiers.
Now the question is that the Palestinian, wherever he is at the mercy of others. He is always sought, he is always observed, he is always caught, he is always mistreated. And this is the tragedy of the Palestinian today. He doesn't have a place to go to.
لا ننسى إنه الحرب هي جزء من السياسة.
We should not forget that war is part of politics, and we struggle by all means at our disposal.
ونحن نناضل بجميع الوسائل.
We struggle on all different fronts, politically, militarily, diplomatically, and socially.
عسكريا ونحن نناضل سياسيا ونحن نناضل دبلوماسيا ونحن نناضل اجتماعيا ونحن نناضل إعلاميا.
Training of the Fedayins, the fighters, begins at 18. But few of those who come here do not already have previous experience in weapons and weaponry. The first operations of Fatah date back to 1965. To some, they are terrorists. To others, they are freedom fighters and heroes, willing to put their lives on the line for the liberation of their homeland. The songs and dances of the Fatah soldiers are also the songs and dances of the children in refugee camps. Here, they are taught the additional subjects that they say UNRWA's regular schools do not offer or gloss over too quickly. They want to learn more about Palestine, its folklore and its traditions, and about the importance of having a homeland of one's own. Here, they acquire the discipline and toughening which, they hope, will enable them to qualify as fighters someday. Decades of exile and life in camps make it difficult for Palestinians to become self-sustaining. From the beginning, many started small businesses. Lots of them still peddle cigarettes or run delivery services in and around the camps. But a lucky few have turned small enterprises into cottage industries, which, as they slowly integrate into the local economy, offer employment in turn to other camp dwellers. But for the individual, here more than anywhere else, education is the key. Bassam, eldest son of Hulbishis, goes to the university and also keeps a part-time job to contribute to the family's income. Scholarships help many Palestinians to go abroad for graduate study programs.
You know, for a Palestinian, it's all over the world the same thing, whether it is in Kuwait, Lebanon, or anywhere else. You are refused to be in the community. Of course, they do accept you as long as you live there with them, but still, you do not belong. You do not have their citizenship. You do not have the same rights. And automatically, the same feeling would be, whether you are in Lebanon, or in Kuwait, or in Saudi Arabia, or anywhere else.
Edward Said, again.
Palestinians have the highest rate of university graduates of any Arab nation. As engineers, as social scientists, as economists, the Palestinians are, in fact, now the intellectual and even the moral elite of the Arab world.
Unfortunately, there are still too many unskilled, and for them there is, at best, seasonal and temporary work, picking fruit for a local landowner, Lebanese or Jordanian, at harvest time, street cleaning, or other menial jobs in the camps, and for the women, domestics in the home of the more fortunate. Although there is a Palestinian workers' union to protect them from being exploited, the life of these people remains meager and insecure. To remedy this situation and better channel the energy and productiveness of the Palestinian people, a series of workers' cooperatives got launched in 1970 by Fatah. It is called Samed. In Arabic, Samed translates as steadfastness, the idea of never giving up. The Palestinians see the Sameds as the productive part of a people in exile. The basic idea is to provide some sort of vocational training to a generation which has known nothing more than camp life, and to equip as many as possible of them to become financially independent, both now in their diaspora and also tomorrow when they will have returned to Palestine. There are several fields of activity: industrial development, craft and cottage enterprises, and even an agricultural sector, under which a few Palestinians provide technical assistance in several African countries. So far, 3,000 people are employed full-time in the Samed workshops, and that number is increasing steadily. Whether they sew cloth, make embroidery for sale abroad, or assemble furniture to fill the needs of camp dwellers or the requirements of Palestinian offices, they are, each one of them, contributing to return to self-sufficiency a people who refuse to remain any longer the ward of the world. The PLO provides other services as well: schools and hospitals, research centers, and so forth.
You see, this hospital is one of the hospitals of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, which is one of the institutions of the PLO. Of course, our services we give to all people who need this help. Our plans are divided into two plans: for disaster time and for peacetime. This hospital here is a specialized hospital for the cardiovascular surgery and for the pediatric surgery and for the neurosurgery. And daily we have in this hospital at least 2 major operations.
كيف الخروج هذا؟
خروجه كتير أخضر، إسهال كتير ماي.
ماي مثل ماي، لون كيف هذا؟
We have big problems, not only of the wounded, but also we take the responsibility of the refugees. The people were under great stress, especially the small kids, the children. Those people are homeless now, and we face many problems, especially in the psychological situation of the small kids and of the grown-up people. They lost all what they have done since they were deported from Palestine in 1948. All what they had built, members of their families, they have lost everything. So you have to support them, you have to stay beside them.
For many, the first move had been to the West Bank. There, they lived in camps, but at least they were still in their own country. In '67, when Israel occupied the rest of Palestine, the West Bank camps emptied themselves in a new mass exodus, this time across the blown-up Allenby Bridge into Jordan. Thanks to the Israeli-Jordanian open bridge policy, this gateway between two worlds at war remains open to this day, a link for Palestinians in exile and those who stayed behind. Dr. Saeed says,
for the first time, it became apparent to Palestinians that if they were going to rely exclusively upon the Arab states to wage their struggle for them, they would get nowhere. And therefore, Palestinians had to take their own progress towards self-determination in their own hands. At a moment of the deepest collective Arab failure, the Palestinians began then to assert themselves and to take up arms to struggle towards self-determination.
In '67, when the rest of Palestine was occupied, I was a soldier in the Jordanian army. The king ordered us to withdraw without fighting, and so the whole of Palestine fell to Zionist control. There had been resistance before, but '67 was when the Palestinian Revolution really started. Since '67, we've had our own weapons, our own soldiers. We've become public. 3 years later, within 48 hours, 3 airliners were hijacked and forced to land in the Jordanian desert. After days of negotiation, the hostages were freed and the planes destroyed. Palestinians had made the complacent world aware of their plight through dramatic news headlines. That same year, in Jordan, violent clashes occurred between Palestinian and Jordanian troops. Many died on both sides, and many Palestinian fighters left for another exile, to Lebanon this time, and many other places. But the spirit of resistance and determination to restore their rights was not dead. What had been common scenes in the streets of Amman just moved to Beirut as Palestinians continued to rally to their cause. During the '60s, Gaza was the stage for protest and sabotage. But after 1970, little remained of the unrest there. However, the October War had instilled a new sense of pride to the Arabs. On the occupied West Bank, this was expressed through more and more demonstrations against both the military authorities and the appearance of new Jewish settlers on Arab land. The result was tightened security, numerous arrests, and for some, deportation. From 1967 till now, the rebuilt Allenby Bridge has become the road to exile for most of the 1,300 people expelled by the Israelis from Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah, taking from the military governor office in Jericho at 12 o'clock noon to the bridge, where they reached the half of the bridge, and they told me that from here you can go, but you can't come back. I said, someday I will come back to my country because it's my country. We never thought that they will treat us after the occupation by the way they treated the people after the occupation. Demolishing houses, demolishing villages, treating people the way they are treating them. That will create more hatred from the Arabs toward the Jews. That's why they are still in the camp, and they're working in the camp, they're raising their kids in the camp, because they know that someday we are going back. For instance, I can't go back. I want to go back, not as a visit. I want to go back and live in my hometown. My pharmacy is closed. I can't open my pharmacy. My wife will go there only for 1 week, 2 weeks every summer to renew the permits and come. All my family, or my tribe, if we say a white family, they are living there. I have my land, my house, my interest there. Right, I'm living here. I'm having not a bad time, but still I want to go back to my hometown.
Amman is a temporary haven for many Palestinian deportees, their only alternative to Israeli prison.
They used to hang me from my feet with my upside down, with my head down, and they began to beat me on my feet and on my sexual organs for hours.
Israel concedes that some excesses were committed over the years by its occupying forces. It says that disciplinary measures were taken where cases have been documented, and denies that torture was ever a state policy. But the UN Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices in the occupied territories, basing itself on witnesses and press reports within and outside Israel, stated, the indications are very strong that cases of torture occurred and continue to occur.
My wife and my children are ready now to fight and to be killed in the sake of Palestine, in any time. And I have my son, since 2 months, Ish Mafkoud.
He's lost.
He's lost. This is his picture, and I don't feel any sad about him. This is my son. Since 2 months in Lebanon. He is lost.
Many others have gone, and many others will never return. For these men who have never known a land they can call their own, the rebirth of Palestine is the cause. Unfortunately, killings and hangings, bullets and tanks leave indelible marks in the minds of the young. Proofs are easy to find in the Middle East these days. Wherever their parents were killed, during one of the many wars and conflicts the Palestinians have known these last 30 years, these orphans are the wards of Fatah. The memory of the parents lives on in the recollection of their sons and daughters.
I will be a girl, but if my country is liberated, I'll be a doctor, an engineer, anything that my country needs me.
Yes, Walid.
Edward Said remarks,
one of the saddest things to see is young children for whom no alternative exists except the gun. But I have a feeling that's changing. Over the years now, there are more Palestinian schools in which greater emphasis is placed on academic subjects, on widening the educational experience of each child so that the day is not defined by exercises with a gun. There is a Palestinian dialect which is different in Arabic from, let's say, Syrian or Lebanese or Egyptian. There are traditions, there are costumes, the family and clan organizations are different. Cuisine, turns of phrase, popular stories, mythology, and so on and so forth. So that you had in Palestine essentially a community, but nevertheless a cohesive national community which associated itself with the land.
I believe the present generation among the Palestinians cannot be called as moderate as the older generations among the Palestinians. That's why I think now it's the golden opportunity to have a peaceful settlement with the Israelis, between the Palestinians and Israelis, provided that the Israelis will recognize the rights of self-determination of the Palestinians, and including the establishment of their own independent state on what remained from the Palestinian soil that was occupied in 1967.
محمد عبد الرحمن أبو حلتم مجدية محمد علي إسماعيل هاي إبراهيم.
Going home for a short visit is the hope of most Palestinians in diaspora. During the months when the Israeli military authorities implement this right of family reunions, thousands try to take advantage of it.
حسن سعدي جهاد محمد عطف يلا يا شب شو اسمك.
To get the permit is long and difficult. The screenings by both sides meticulous. But it is easier for Palestinians wishing to leave the occupied areas, especially when they are not requesting a right of return.
سلمان محمد القهوجي زينب عبد عبد وانت أحمد عبد الله.
Once by the bridge, there are further checks. Long hours of waiting before being called to board one of the buses. Because the Israelis process only 24 buses each day, some have to return time after time, hoping that tomorrow they will get their chance. On the other side of the river, there will be more security, body searches, customs duties which sometimes make it necessary to abandon gifts or purchases behind. Some do not go back by way of the bridge. They are guerrillas who find their own way across borders. Their missions illustrate the conflict between what is justifiable to them and what is inexcusable to others. This took place in Malak, Israel, in 1974, following a raid at the school there by the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. 21 Israeli children and 4 adults were killed that day. There are differences of opinions among Palestinians regarding the extent to which violence is justifiable. The killing of innocent civilians, such as Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics or travelers at Lod Airport, brought widespread international condemnation.
You see, we are against all this violence. The PLO is against it. You know it. And we have declared it many times. But we have to remember and to look to this case from all its views.
The PLO still accepts responsibility for raids inside Israel. But violence continues on both sides. This took place in Aziyeh, southern Lebanon, after an Israeli air raid. Over 100 were killed, men, women, and children. Similar military actions have been taken over the years by Israel against Palestinian camps in other Arab countries, in some cases following guerrilla raids inside Israel or against Israeli interests elsewhere. Violence breeds hatred. Retaliation brings only further retaliation. An eye for an eye is often paid at high interest rates in our day and age. Events of these last years have made the world painfully aware that the Palestinian people and the recognition and implementation of their rights are the key to any solution in the Middle East. They are there, they are a fact. Like it or not, no formula can be found, no resolution implemented, which does not take their inalienable rights into consideration.
The Security Council, expressing its continuing concern with the grave situation in the Middle East.
From the creation of the United Nations to this day, no topic has been the subject of more debates and deliberation by the world body. Following the 1967 war, the Security Council adopted the all-important Resolution 242.
Peace in the Middle East, which should include.
However, the PLO found this resolution objectionable.
United Nations Security Council Resolution 242 is not accepted by the Palestinians for the following reasons. First of all, it ignored the national rights of the Palestinians. The second thing, it didn't mention about the national rights of the Palestinians and looked to the matter as if it's a conflict between the Arab states and Israel. Although the crux of the problem in the Middle East is the Palestinian cause.
Geneva, December 1973. Since the first session of the Geneva Peace Conference, several significant developments affecting the Palestinians have taken place. United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3375 requests the participation of the PLO in all peace efforts on an equal footing with all other parties. Israel remains opposed to this on the ground that, among other things, 242 calls for negotiation among states, and the PLO is not a state, and also because they have always refused to deal with groups which they see as bent on destroying Israel. In 1974 and 75, the General Assembly proclaimed its resolutions 3236 and 3375, which respectively affirm the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people and recognize the PLO as its representative in the deliberations of the United Nations.
It is mentioned in the United Nations Resolution 3236 that the Palestinians have their own inalienable rights, including their right for self-determination, for their sovereignty and independence, for their repatriation to their homeland. And we see to it that this settlement should take into consideration all these rights, national rights of the Palestinians.
United Nations, New York, November 13th, 1974. Yasser Arafat comes to address the General Assembly.
وإنني أتوجه إليكم أيضا أن تمكنوا شعبنا من العودة من منفاه الإجباري.
I appeal to you further to aid our people's return to its homeland from an involuntary exile imposed on it by force of arms, by tyranny, by oppression.
ليعيش في وطنه ودياره وتحت ظلال أشجار مزارعه حرا سيدا.
So that we can regain our property, our land, and thereafter live in our national homeland, free and sovereign, enjoying all the privileges of nationhood.
وفي مجالات الإبداع لقد جئتكم يا سيادة الرئيس بغصن الزيتون في يدي.
Today I have come bearing an olive branch and a freedom fighter's gun.
فلا تسقط الغصن الأخضر من يدي.
Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand. I repeat, do not let the olive branch fall from my hand.
Homeless, stateless, even without an identity card. We haven't flags, we haven't states, we haven't a home, we haven't anything concerning human being rights, but accepts misery in this diaspora. But we kept very important thing, our will and determination. And for this, we are still existing. We started from zero, but we now are the important number in this area, in this formula.
We are not after 10 years or 3 years or just solving a problem like this. No, we want our rights, we want our land, we want to go back and live in Palestine.
We are struggling to regain our own identity. This is a divine right that is given to us by God.
I think that the Palestinians, they are well educated and well cultured. They can take part in all fields of human activity. I mean, scientific, arts, literature. I think as a small nation, we can take part.
This is my feeling. And I am ready to leave everything here and go back to my home. Really? Everything. I am ready to start from the zero, even.
Do not deny the people who were original owners the right to go back. Do not deny the Palestinian per se the right to perform as a human being.
I am a human being. If the world wants me to abide by the morality of humanity, then they must treat me as a human being.
United Nations, New York, November 29, 1978.
Cumplimos hoy en esta ceremonia con una de las tareas específicas.
We are complying today in this ceremony with one of the specific recommendations that the Charter mandates to our organization.
De uno de los pueblos que forma
the recognition of the fundamental rights of one of the peoples which constitutes mankind. The inalienable rights that in countless documents are demanded for the Palestinian people.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we commemorate for the first time the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The General Assembly in 1974 began tackling the political aspect of the Palestinian question. In that year, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 3236, which reaffirmed the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including the right to self-determination, the right to national independence and sovereignty, and the right of the Palestinians to return to their homes and property. The General Assembly established a committee on the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people.
Dès le départ, certains ont choisi de préjuger des travaux du comité en prétendant que celui-ci ne serait pas impartial.
Right from the start, some chose to prejudge the committee's work and declared that it would not be impartial. In fact, in order to encourage the contribution of all sectors, one of the first actions of the committee was to invite all member states to participate in its work as observers, an invitation repeated in '77. The committee, in due course, made its recommendations after careful and objective consideration and in strict conformity with its mandate. These recommendations were based on widely accepted UN resolutions and the following principles.
La question de Palestine est au cœur du problème du Moyen-Orient.
1. The question of Palestine is the heart of the Middle East problem, and no solution could be envisaged without taking into account the rights of the Palestinian people. 2. The realization of these inalienable rights would contribute to a solution of the Middle East crisis. 3. The PLO, as the representative of the Palestinian people, should participate on an equal footing with other parties in all conferences on the Middle East held under United Nations auspices. 4. The inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force and Israel's obligation to withdraw completely and quickly from all territory so occupied. The recommendations were widely supported in the Security Council, but not endorsed due to the veto of a permanent member. However, the Assembly subsequently endorsed the committee's recommendations by 90 in favor, 16 against, and 30 abstentions. In its second report, the committee reaffirmed their validity and the urgency of implementation. The Assembly reconfirmed its endorsement by an even larger vote. Although Israel and some other countries have persisted in opposing implementation, we are convinced that these recommendations would form the basis for a just peace. Some have pointed out that no reference is made to the right of Israel to exist as an independent state. The answer is that this is not within the mandate of the committee. Their worry is unfounded, since at no stage was the independence of Israel questioned, inasmuch as it is a member state of the UN. I must add that Israel was created by United Nations Resolution 181 of November 29, 1947. That same resolution made provision for a Palestinian state which Israel does not wish to recognize.
I am a human being. If the world wants me to abide by the morality of humanity, then they must treat me as a human being.